News Now is brought to you by the Bank of Guam, the People's Bank. From the Pacific News Center in Hagåtña, Guam, here's Clint Ridgell and Janella Carrera with Betsy Brown and Roselle Romanes. PNC Sports with Blake Watson. And weather with Joanna O. With your news now.
Hafa and good evening. You're watching PNC's News Now. We're broadcasting live in Guam and in Saipan. I'm Janella Carrera.
And I'm Clint Ridgell. Thanks for tuning in. Topping your news tonight, police launched a death investigation after 46-year-old Kenster Eder was found unresponsive by the side of the road and died from a blunt force trauma to the head. PNC's Roselle Romanes spoke with Eder's son, Joseph, and he tells us his father has been missing since Sunday and that his family wasn't informed until the chief medical examiner ruled his father's death a homicide.
A man goes missing on Sunday, and 5 days later, the island's medical examiner ruled his death a homicide. That's what happened to 46-year-old Kenster Eder, which left his family distraught, hurt, and looking for answers.
The criminal investigation detectives are conducting a death investigation in regards to this particular incident.
Eder's son Joseph informed PNC that his father left for Governor Joseph Flores Beach Sunday morning. When he didn't return home the next day, family members searched for him, reported him missing to the Guam Police Department, and called the Guam Memorial Hospital in fear that Eder ended up there. Joseph says he called the hospital several times for days after he was missing, but he was told his father was not admitted at the hospital. When he called back on Wednesday, he was told otherwise. He was told his father was admitted to GMH on Sunday and discharged the following day. Accepting what GMH said, he thought his father was out and about, so they searched for him again. The next day, Joseph said his sister went back to GMH for more information, and that's when they were told that his father died from a heart attack. Joseph says he froze at that moment and became upset because his father was at the hospital all along, and GMH failed to inform his family until his father was pronounced dead. Distressed and confused, he demanded to see his father's body, only to find out from medical examiner Dr. Aurelio Espinola that his father did not die from a heart attack. He died from blunt force trauma to the head. But what happened between the time his father went missing and him ending up dead at the morgue?
He was located Sunday evening. We received a 911 call, medics, and the medics picked him up and transported him to GMH from Route 1 I-Connect in Upper Tumon.
PNC asked Balahaja why the delay in informing Eder's family.
In this particular case, it was a Sunday afternoon, right? So we wouldn't necessarily be able to push that information out to the media and get it out until Monday morning. And given that, there was a time lapse in regards to how that information went out. And so, we're going to look at all of those things to determine what we could do better.
Joseph said his family is glad that they at least found his father's body, but they are still searching for answers as to what happened to their beloved father and husband, Kenster Eder. GPD spokesman Officer AJ Balahaja says the department is seeking the public's help. If you have any information about this incident, please call Guam Crime Stoppers at 477-4357. Roselle Romanes, PNC News.
GMH spokeswoman June Perez says GMH extends its deepest apologies to the Eder family for the passing of their loved one. She says this unfortunate miscommunication has never happened before at GMH and that this isolated incident was immediately addressed by the hospital.
Department of Corrections Director Jose San Agustin is facing charges of discrimination in a civil rights complaint filed by former DOC psychologist Dr. George Kalingal. The complaint was filed through the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Dr. George Kalingal says he believes Department of Corrections Director Jose San Agustin is racist. Dr. Kalingal filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission on November 5th, 2014. In his complaint, Kalingal says San Agustin, who is Chamorro, informed Kalingal, who is Indian, that the contract he had just won to work as DOC's clinical psychologist was being pulled. This was in January of last year. Kalingal says San Agustin claimed that the reason for pulling his contract was that District Court Chief Judge Francis Tydenko Gatewood insisted that he hire Andrea Lighthouser, who is white, instead. Ms. Lighthouser's previous contract with DOC expired in January 2014. Judge Gatewood was under the mistaken impression that I was not a licensed clinical psychologist, Kalingal says in his complaint, although I have testified in her courtroom many times. Then, in April of 2014, Kalingal points out Lighthouser quit and a second bid for contract was put out for the clinical psychologist position. Kalingal says he placed a bid for the contract and, for a second time, he won the contract. But Kalingal says even though he rightfully won the contract, nothing has been done to finalize it so that he can begin working at DOC. To clarify, he notes, I am indeed a licensed clinical psychologist. Finally, he writes, I believe that I have been discriminated against based on my national origin, Indian, in violation of the Civil Rights Act. The EEOC gave DOC notice of the discrimination complaint on November 26 last year, but DOC did not receive the notice until December 8th. St. Augustine was given until December 19 to respond to the complaint, but according to a source, he has not yet filed a response and has asked the Attorney General's office for assistance in the matter. Dr. Kalingal served as DOC's clinical psychologist for about 16 years, starting in 1994. He tells PNC that during his tenure, he had many programs to help rehabilitate inmates, but after leaving DOC, those programs were suspended. Calls to DOC Director St. Augustine were not returned as of news time.
It was a slam dunk victory for the Attorney General's office. Tommy Kichichua-Faison was found guilty on all charges related to the Days Inn robbery and police shooting last December. The guilty verdict came just a day after closing arguments were made in the Faison's attempted murder and robbery trial. The jury found him guilty of attempted murder, aggravated assault, and robbery, all with special allegations of the use and possession of a deadly weapon, as well as theft of a motor vehicle and terrorizing. In the early morning hours of December the 4th, Faison and Irvin Munya White robbed the Days Inn at gunpoint and fled in the front desk employee's car. Police caught up with them on the road, and during the chase, Faison shot at a police car with 2 officers on board from behind. Faison and White were eventually caught hiding in a home that was under construction along Father Duenas Drive. White took a plea deal in the case and testified against Faison during his trial. The attorneys react to the guilty verdict.
Yeah, we're obviously very pleased with the verdict. We thought that the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury obviously agreed. We appreciate the support of the public and the Guam Police Department. Obviously took this case very seriously, did an outstanding investigation, and we think that justice was served in this case.
Can we get a comment? What is your reaction to?
Oh, no comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Gallagher says the AG's office intends to ask for the maximum punishment, which under Guam law, based on the crimes he committed, is life in prison.
Yet another rape case to report. A 55-year-old man is accused of raping a 13-year-old girl last month. According to the 13-year-old victim, Roland Vincent Borja, a man known to her, forcibly raped her as she was getting ready for bed. Borja was charged with 2 counts, first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 1 count for rape and 1 count for causing injury. The victim told police that she was in a lot of pain and that she was bleeding. The victim said as she was getting ready for bed, Borja began fondling her. She says she tried to scream for help, but Borja held her down and threatened to kill her. The victim says Borja then proceeded to rape her for the next 10 to 30 minutes and at one point even told her he loved her. Borja is being held on $100,000 cash bail. His next hearing is on February 13th.
More delays in the murder case of Keith Jermaine Garrido. He was supposed to appear in court today to plead guilty, but like his other hearings, that didn't happen. Garrido is charged with the heinous murder of Nancy Moffness back in November of 2012. He had changed his mind several times over the last 2 years, but according to his attorney, Stephen Hattori, he is ready to plead guilty. It's not clear which charges he will plead guilty to. At a hearing last month, Garrido had stated that he only wanted to plead guilty to murder and not aggravated murder. Aggravated murder would remove his chances at parole. He was all set to move forward with a plea today, but Chief Prosecutor Phil Tedinko says there have been some new developments in the plea agreement that will require an amended plea agreement.
The plea agreement will be filed next week. We've had to make a change and there's been some developments, and So we need a short continuance because we had to renegotiate that plea agreement, but it will be filed Monday, Tuesday. I'll be sending it to Mr. Hattori today so he can go over it with his client. Plus, I also need time to make certain that I get that same plea agreement over to the family of the victim. They're in the mainland.
Judge Anita Sokola granted the continuation and set the change of plea hearing to Friday the 13th at 10 a.m.
So yesterday, PNC brought you the news of a local pageant that was falsely claiming to be affiliated with an international pageant system. Well, PNC's Betsy Brown joins us again tonight with more on this story.
Janella, the Mrs. Guam pageant has dropped the use of the word international since the cease and desist letter was sent, but the pageant is still set to take place next Wednesday. 3 of the original contestants will not be participating, however. I sat down with them today to hear why.
It was a dream, you know, and it was very difficult for a lot of us to try and decide between morals and, I guess, being in a pageant, you know?
Kathleen Thomas Beneventi was the first contestant to leave the Mrs. Guam pageant after learning that it was not affiliated with international pageants, as she says she and the other contestants were told. As PNC reported yesterday, pageant organizer Jerome Tamagan was issued a cease and desist letter to stop using the federally registered trademarks Mrs. International, Miss Teen International, and the company's slogan and logo. But it was the contestants of Mrs. Guam themselves who discovered the local pageant was not affiliated with international pageants. Grace Young and Jennifer Parker also left the pageant, saying they felt deceived.
The outcome was I decided to walk out of this pageant because it wasn't right. You know, I felt deceived and need to do what's right for my 2 girls.
All 3 women had already received sponsorships for their participation in Mrs. Guam, but they say that money has all since been returned. And while they aren't certain whether Tamagan intentionally misrepresented the pageant or not, they think they deserve to know the truth when they signed up for the pageant, and it's something they think the public deserves as well.
No one really knows why the pageant dropped international. No one knows what we personally had to endure during this process and what we went through when we found out that we had been deceived. It's very disheartening, and now our story is heard and people are aware of the situation.
Mrs. Guam pageant organizer Jerome Tamagan is currently serving a 5-year probation after he pleaded guilty to theft of property and official misconduct regarding graduation funds that went missing from Simon Sanchez High School in 2010.
All right, thanks, Betsy. Well, speaking of beauty queen, our very own beauty queen, Blake Watson, has what's coming up next in sports.
So fresh and so clean. Hey, I'm feeling so fresh and so clean. Got a new haircut. That was a bad joke. But for a good sports report, check out sports. It's not that far away. In the meantime, I'll be jamming. So fresh and so clean. Ain't nobody fresh as me. What?